This show is sponsored by Sevi, answering all your commercial real estate needs. Sevi is the first commercial real estate company committed to the 4 C's: commercial real estate, community, content, and culture. Go visit Sevi at Sevi, SEVI, properties.com. Again, SeviProperties.com. Hello, everyone. Welcome to the DMV Business Show. I'm your host, Otto Sevilla, and today I have a very special guest for you. We have Dr. Helen McKibben. Dr. McKibben is a PhD in psychology and a licensed counselor. She's also author of a new book called Drop: Making Great Decisions. Welcome to the show, Doctor.
Well, thank you for having me.
Pleasure is all mine. Before we get started into your personal and business journey, I'd like the audience to get to know a little bit about what you do for a living every day.
I am in private practice as a licensed professional counselor, and I deal with different groups and teach them how to manage feelings.
Nice. All types of feelings.
Yes.
Okay, great. And I know recently you have a book that just came out, right?
Yes, that is my life's work, a methodology that I've developed over time as I've gone through my education and experience as a therapist. So.
Nice. So, are you originally from this area?
No, let me give you a little bit of my journey. I was originally from California. I went to school there in college and found out about mind-body medicine, as many people did back then. But what I found myself wanting to really learn about was the neuroscience and how the brain worked behind all these people who were doing meditation or TM or relaxation techniques. So my focus was really more medical. As a result of that, I went to graduate school in Los Angeles. And in 2008, I went back and got my doctorate of psychology, which is a little different than a PhD, but it's the same type of education. Okay.
Okay, thank you. Did you know all along, I guess growing up in California, that this is what you wanted to do?
Not all along, but once I got into college, I was in a medical family, so I was very medically oriented, and I ran into these people working with emotion and how they were reflected in the body, and it really captured my interest. And then being of a medical orientation, I wanted to integrate that with how the brain worked emotionally with the body. And so my whole emphasis has been to develop a methodology that anyone can use to, when triggered emotionally, how to tap into the brain in the way it's already designed to use the way you feel and prior memory recall to make new decisions that are more effective with you, to stop patterns that aren't working for you.
Oh, that's great. So you're already mentioning it. We might as well just go into it. How can someone do that if they're in a situation similar to what you described?
Well, let me give you a little forward on that. First of all, I never tell people what to do in the book or in my life as a counselor. I teach people a methodology to tap into the brain to listen to themselves and make their own decisions. So there's not a dependency on me or a book or a podcast, or when triggered, they don't have to remember what someone told them to say or do. I'm really guiding them into listening to their own thoughts, feelings, and ideas and making decisions based on that. So there's not a dependency on other people.
Okay, I understand. So it's basically a methodology they can use themselves by themselves.
Absolutely.
Okay,
Very simple methodology, but it's based on neuroscience and the brain and how the brain works emotionally, as I mentioned before.
sure. So if someone's in a situation where I guess they want to change, what methodologies should they be doing or using?
Well, there's two things I do. The first thing is to educate them in the book or in practice how this happened. How did they come to be doing what they're doing, because it is a relief for them to understand that many of the things we do that aren't working very well are learned growing up. And we don't blame parents, because parents parent us or manage feelings the way they did. But if they arrive in adulthood and all of a sudden they say, well, I'm a good person, but things aren't working very well for me. I'm not finding effective dating. I'm not meeting a partner. I'm not able to sleep. I'm not able to function with disruptive people. If they find those patterns are there, it isn't because there's something wrong with them emotionally. It's that they learn styles of managing feelings in people growing up that may have worked for the parent, but they're emulating, or their brains learned in the first 5 years of development how to do things a certain way. And they're finding it's not working. I'm not liking who I'm attracting. I'm used at work, not given support for my expertise. And they'll find there are problematic areas in their life with people, situations, or even their patterns of thinking or criticizing themselves that they're not working. This book is designed to first educate them on why they're in the position of doing the things that aren't effective for them, to identify specifically what's going wrong in the life that they wish was different, and then a methodology to tap into the brain to redo what they're currently worried about or ineffective, they see as ineffective, to a different decision-making criteria of how to approach people or situations or even themselves.
Okay.
So
Okay.
we're
Wow.
we're redoing really maybe styles of things we learned growing up, or even our parents learned growing up and passed on to us, that aren't working in their lives. And it's a simple method, and I'd like to outline. First, I define for them, this is why you're doing what you're doing. There's nothing wrong with you. And that is such a relief for them to understand that listening to a critical voice or being used by other people isn't something that's going to be lifelong, that there's a reason they have a critical voice, or there's a reason that people read them as a caretaker instead of having full self-esteem. Once they can identify the things that are triggering them that aren't going well, I have a simple method, and here it is. The brain's first response to a triggered feeling is to light us up physically. So if when people are triggered, they don't have a way of identifying they're triggered by people, situations, or thoughts, those things build all day long, and they get overwhelmed and in real trouble because they say, I'm just overwhelmed. I can't manage all this disruption or other people. If they have an immediate way of identifying it, which is where they uniquely light up physically in their bodies, you may hold your breath, my heart rate may go up, it's unique to me. If they learn to shift once they're triggered and notice where they feel their feelings physically, unique to them, that shifts them away from listening to a critical voice or running from feelings or immediately responding to people who's disrupting them. Second, if they drop to what I call the blank screen, which is feeling the full weight of their legs supported, the full weight of the arms supported, and the air going down into your lungs, that action isn't mindfulness or meditation or relaxation. That dropping to the blank screen indicates that they have gone through the very feeling they weren't dealing with. And the brain, because of dropping to the blank screen, is activated to recall every time they felt that way before, what worked for them, what didn't work for them. The brain in nanoseconds is designed to configure how you feel in the moment. And every time you felt that way before, it configures it for you in the matter of seconds that you're dropping to the blank screen. And all they hear is words or ideas of what they could do so they don't feel those ways again. Let me give you an example. Have you ever walked away from a situation and said, why didn't I listen to myself? I knew this was going to happen. Has that ever happened to you?
Yes.
The words that the brain configures after an individual drops to the blank screen includes memory recall in what they say or do next. Those are the words or the knowing the brain spits out, like, watch out, this guy you're dating feels like an old one. And then the individual would learn to sit with their feelings or those words, that knowing, long enough to make a decision. Now, why is that important? Because there are wonderful techniques out there, and there's wonderful neurologists or therapists or podcasts. But if you don't have a way to identify when you're triggered and go through the feeling, number one, you don't get memory recall involved in what you decide or say next. And you keep doing the same thing over and over again, coming up with elaborate ways to do things differently, but the results are the same. Why? Because you don't get memory recall involved in what you say or do next. The next thing, dropping to the blank screen, listening to your knowing or words, will not remain permanent. You can notice you're triggered, go through the feeling, and listen to your words. But what makes it permanent is making a decision based on what you hear in yourself. And once you make a decision of what you'll say or do then, or if you ever feel that way and again, for example, with an interaction with someone else, it completely resolves the feeling for the brain. And you walk away not thinking about it over and over again or second guessing yourself. So, what is so different about the book Drop, Making Great Decisions? It gives a method that not only can identify, go through, activate the brain in the way it's designed to work emotionally. But once you listen to yourself, not somebody else, and make a decision, the brain is resolved emotionally, and it doesn't have to keep bringing up that feeling or that incident or whatever that person said or did over and over again, because you resolved it by making a decision.
That's great. Why do you, I'm trying to think, doctor, if someone sees that they do a certain behavior, which is not good, right? And they're being triggered for whatever reason, and they continue to do it, but they know that this is maybe a trigger and it's not going to end up well for them. I guess they should go through this method you just mentioned.
Instead of going up in their thought process and trying to talk themselves into breathing or relaxing, or talk themselves into saying or doing something. Because if they go up here, two things happen. They don't get memory retrieval of what they've said or done before, or when they felt this way before, incorporated in what they say or do next. And if they don't drop to the blank screen, get that memory retrieval involved in what they say or do next, and they don't make a decision, the feeling or the memory or the thing that's bothering them keeps coming up persistently in their thought process. And then if they continue long enough, they'll start second guessing what they said or did. And that process can last for hours or days, instead of immediately noticing you're triggered, taking a few seconds to drop to the blank screen, listening to your words or ideas, and making decisions for yourself, which resolves it for the brain, and the brain doesn't have to keep bringing up the memory of the situation or the person because it's resolved. And you might say, well, Helen, what if people don't have enough time to drop long enough to hear their words or make decisions? Then the brain afterwards will keep bringing up the memory of the person or the incident. Then there's a secondary opportunity. They keep thinking about it. Why did I say this? Why did I say that? To then shift, notice where they're lit up, drop to the blank screen long enough to hear their words. And once they pick their words or ideas or make a decision, it's completely resolved for the brain when they decide what they'll say or do next time. So the process is effective in the moment of being triggered by people, situations, or thoughts, or after the fact if they walk away from an interaction or a situation and they keep thinking about it. So what resolves feelings physically is dropping to the blank screen, emotionally is making decisions, and you have to do both.
I understand. I was recently talking with someone, doctor, about another individual, and I hadn't seen in a while. I was like, oh, I've noticed that the person gained weight, right? They're overweight now than before. And the person was sounding like, I believe that person is more stressed in their life or maybe have other problems. And maybe that's the way they deal with stress, maybe overeating, or maybe someone listening to this might say, hey, for me, it might not be food, but it might be alcohol. I pour myself a drink. I don't know, right? Everyone's different. Um, so if someone's in a situation, they're saying, hey, I have so many things that I'm worried about in my life, and I think that's the reason why I'm doing X or Y, which might not be healthy or helpful for that person. Um, I guess do this or
Well, first you have to define what you're doing, and then you have a methodology to change it. So let's take substances.
Mhm.
Substances, alcohol, food, cigarettes, drugs. Um, the issue about substances is not just the ingestion of the substance, but in the book, it notes they have a number one style of going up in their head every time they're triggered to feel, and they can't stop thinking about the food or the substance or the cigarette or the alcohol. The
Mhm.
addiction is they're thinking constantly all day long about when they can't get the substance. And that
Mm.
in the book is defined as a number one style of running from feelings. I teach the people in the book to notice, do homework first and notice what is my style of running from feelings. Is it overthinking? Is it sitting on feelings? Or is it making decisions? I couple that with linking up where they light up when they're triggered. So they know if they're up in their heads, spinning, not, strategizing instead of going through the process of feeling first and then thinking. Or they know when they're sitting on feelings, oh, I'm fine, everything's cool. But the answer of it's not being resolved is it keeps coming back up. This method, once they're cued that they're being triggered and they know they run from feelings, they shift instead of running from the feelings, overthinking. Notice where they're lit up. That stops the running. They go to the blank screen long enough to listen to their words or ideas and pick an idea and make a decision of what to say or do. So it reverses the process of overthinking. And what causes stress? Stress is the physical manifestation of unresolved feelings. So you have a method where you notice you're triggered, you go through to the blank screen, resolve the autonomic nervous system stress physically, sit there a little longer till you hear your words or ideas. And once you make a decision, it resolves the emotion as well. So the brain doesn't keep bringing it up. So those patterns of their style of running from feelings or who they attract or how they make decisions is done in the first part of the book by saying, giving them homework and defining what did I learn growing up, what's working and what's not. How do I identify when I'm doing that? Because cognition isn't going to work fast enough. They don't have someone at their elbow saying, well, you're running from feelings again, but they're cued by the fact that they're lighting up physically whenever they're running from feelings, either actively, cognitively, or passively by sitting on it. That cues them to immediately shift and go through the feeling they're running, let the brain integrate what's worked or not worked before, and then make a decision of what they'll say or do differently about the thing that triggered them.
Interesting. So it's unresolved feelings. So if I'm thinking of this person that I'm right, and I'm trying to think of their childhood, which I'm familiar with, and it may be that I don't know, but the book will help them as far as sort of unpack those feelings
Yeah.
and deal with them differently.
Gently put, we learn our patterns of managing feelings in people in the first 5 years of brain development. So we don't blame parents, but they may have had a parent that overthought all the time, or thought about cigarettes all the time or food all the time, and
Hmm.
the child absorbs that parent's style of feelings. Let's take alcohol. Let's say you have a parent you love very much. Every time they have stress, they pick up a drink, and the child says, I'll never drink. They go into young adulthood, and the first stressors that hit, they find themselves automatically and unconsciously picking up a drink, not because they want to. Rationale doesn't stop the feeling process of what you learned growing up, but they find themselves lifting up, and then they say, why am I doing this? Number one, they have to figure out where it came from. And number two, they have to have a method to reverse that neuron track that was developed in childhood of automatically and unconsciously picking up a substance whenever they triggered. This goes further to not only identifying it, but going through the feeling that caused them to pick up the substance in the first place, and then making a decision of what they'll say or do. Like, when I dropped, I remembered that I didn't like the way I felt with hangovers, so I'm going to do this instead of drinking. So the lovely thing about the self-reliance and autonomy is they make the decisions, and then they drop. The brain puts forward ideas of what they could say or do differently than what they learned growing up. They implement it. And if they come up with an idea and go, well, I feel good, but it keeps coming up, then I say you drop again and get another idea until you're completely in the position where you're not thinking about it anymore. The other thing is, afterwards, feelings come up, as I mentioned before. You listen to your words, you make a decision of what you'll say or do the next time that happens. Very effective method is not only you decide in the moment, but if you don't decide in the moment, you can always, after the fact, when you're thinking about the person who triggered you, or thinking about, oh, I was reaching for alcohol, you can drop long enough after the fact on your own and make a decision of what you'll say or do when that happens again. And the brain is so powerful that if it happens again, trigger, right? And you pause, the brain will implement the idea that you came up with 6 seconds ago or 6 years ago. So the brain is so powerful and so helpful in making good decisions for ourselves. And some people get reinforced in listening to that brain growing up and following through with their thoughts, feelings, and ideas. And some people, because they probably didn't get reinforced, don't get enough reinforcement. So they go into adulthood not listening to themselves. So what do you think they listen to? How do they make decisions if they learned to shut down listening to themselves because they didn't get enough reinforcement? They listen to that critical voice or other people for what to say or do, and then they start attracting difficult people, or attracting difficult bosses, or attracting people who, can you lend me some money, or people who call for hours. So the pattern of not being reinforced enough to listen to yourself or your own thoughts, feelings, and ideas, we still have to read something to make decisions. So first we learn to read our parents for what to do, and then we watch everyone else and brilliantly figure out what to do based on watching them. But people know the difference if you're listening to yourself when they interact with you, or if you're listening to or trying to get accolades, or have them respond in a positive way to you. So in a very nice professional way, that shift, if you're triggered by someone, and drop to the blank screen, and when you're ready, say your point of view, gives them the opportunity to see that you're not eagerly responding to everything they're saying or doing, that you're pausing, listening to yourself, and responding with your point of view. People know who they can knock off balance and who they can't by the rate of response, the tone of your voice, and the content of what you say. So that's all incorporated, not in a thought process, but absolutely incorporated in a simple way with the drop methodology, and listen to yourself and make decisions.
Dr. McKibben, I like the example you gave earlier as far as a child growing up in a household where one of the parents, let's say, drank often, or maybe there was alcoholism involved. What happened if in the same household now there's two children, right? And both observing the same thing, same household. One of them, when they go to adulthood and mature, decides, like you said, both of them say, "No, I'm not going to drink. I've seen what dad does to mom and all this and all that," hypothetically speaking. But then they both say it, but obviously one actually does that in adulthood and doesn't become an alcoholic or barely drinks or doesn't drink at all. And the other one goes the route that maybe he saw the other parent do with alcoholism.
It's a wonderful question. There may be two children in the household, but remember, there's two parents with two different styles of managing triggers in life. One may be running from feelings, strategizing about a substance, and one may be sitting on it going, "Oh, I'm fine," tolerating everyone's misbehavior, and then finally exploding or imploding. So
Hmm.
it is who you grow up around, and different children are treated maybe differently within a family system, and they will go toward the parent that isn't mistreating them or that they feel more comfortable with and absorb their style of managing feelings in people. Whereas the other child may see that the drinking works for dad, so unconsciously and automatically they pick up a drink. So it depends on which style of managing feelings in people the child incorporates.
So really is that individual perspective and what they choose to pick up or not to pick up.
Well, it's more unconscious than that, but yes, they may say to themselves, "Oh, it's working for dad, it should work for me," or um, you know, mom's sitting on feelings and then exploding. They don't want to do that either, but they go out into the adult world and they find themselves being very nice and proper and great, and people are walking all over them, and then finally they explode. And that's when they look for something. What am I doing wrong? Why am I in the position of running that number one or number two style that I outline in the book? And what do I do instead? And I say it's the third style, the drop to the blank screen,
Hmm.
that will reverse that neuron track that learned to pick up a drink, or that neuron track that learned to sit on feelings till you explode, with a new configuration of notice I'm triggered, shift, drop to the blank screen, listen to my words, and make a decision of what to say or do differently. And the reason this works isn't just because of me and my studying psychology and neurology. It's because the brain adapts to what feels better for you, not what feels worse. And people never change because they aren't given another style of managing things. But once they have a new style and they end up afterwards feeling better and not overthinking things over and over again, re-stressing themselves, the brain will adapt to what feels better automatically and unconsciously. It takes practice, right?
Yeah.
You are a golf expert and you played for 30 years, and all of a sudden you get a new coach and they say, "Hey, forget that old golf swing. We're going to teach you a new one." They would break down the steps in the very way that I'm breaking down for you. The notice you're triggered, shift, drop till you're not listening to your words. And they would teach the new golf swing in those steps. And that golf expert would go out all week long practicing what they were taught to do physically, going through the steps until it became automatic and unconscious after hundreds of repetitions of doing it differently. And that's the new configuration taking over the old configuration of what wasn't working for you.
That's great. We started the show already going deep into this, which is not typical what I do.
Oh, okay.
So yeah, but no, but that's great, doctor. I want to go briefly back to your education. You said California. So what brought you here to the East Coast to the DMV area?
Wonderful question. I was accepted for an internship at St. Elizabeth's Hospital, which was a training hospital at the time. You had a fabulous program. There were two interns per department, and we all had courses together. And we saw patients, a wide variety of patients in different settings at St. Elizabeth's Hospital, deaf, blind, from foreign countries, um, serious psychotic disorders or emotional disorders. And so that was in my very early years of training. Based on that experience, I stayed in the area and got my first job um, outside of St. Elizabeth's Hospital. And then, interestingly enough, ran into a wonderful psychiatrist who started a program on addictions in a very new way. He developed a program that was outpatient where people didn't have to give up their lives or jobs, and they could uh, go into treatment for substance abuse. And what he knew was that there was an underlying emotion that they couldn't get to, or they had to relearn how to identify and manage feelings. And that's where I came in with my methodology and worked there for decades, helping people learn how to feel when they no longer had a substance to cut off how they feel or
Hmm.
numb themselves. And then I over the years that methodology became effective for any number of issues: sleep, difficult people, relationships with self, um, sports. I mean, the effectiveness of using the brain when you shift and you get memory recall involved in what you say or do, you don't repeat the patterns that didn't work for you again. And there's a lot of mindfulness and meditation and relaxation techniques, EMDR, all the things that bring the autonomic nervous system back to neutral. Well, this does that very quickly. And then the exciting part of the method is if you make a decision, the physiology stays there. It doesn't come back again. And if you make a decision, the emotion doesn't come back. You don't keep re-triggering yourself emotionally. So of all the wonderful techniques, what I want to give is a quick, effective method of even knowing you're triggered, going through it, and change your response by listening to yourself of what you're going to try and say or do differently.
You mentioned you came into this practice and you were there for a long time, and how did you even come about as far as this methodology yourself?
I developed it over the
So
years.
with experience, you're like, this is what's working for patients. This is not working that much, and then you formed
Well,
it through there.
it's a little reversed. As you remember, when I was in college, there was an emphasis on mind-body medicine, and I went the neurology route. And so I developed a method based on what happens in the brain when people are triggered to feel. This memory recall that comes in is there for all of us. That knowing that I walked away from the situation, why didn't I listen to myself? That is built into us as human beings. It's marvelous. I'm just teaching people how to tap into what's already functioning very well emotionally in the brain. So I put that together and then got hired in situations where I would teach people about identifying, managing, and resolving feelings for themselves. And it worked very well for people. And I had my private practice as well. So I had my private practice, and then I would go out and do groups, for example, in this situation, just as an expert or a consultant in teaching people to identify, manage, and resolve triggered feelings.
How long have you had your private practice for?
The private practice, about 30, 35, 37 years.
Okay, good amount of time.
Yeah, yeah. And this was developed before then. There's wonderful techniques out there, but this is something that I've been doing for years. And I've always been persuaded by everyone I work with, including psychiatrists, you got to train people to do what you do. It's so effective. Or clients I've worked with said, "Oh, you're the only one that does this. You've got to write a book so I can send it to my sister, or, send it to people who can't come to your office in Washington, D.C." So after years, I did take the giant step of writing a book, and it's a long process, but I'm really pleased that it's done and out there, and I'm getting very nice reviews for people who are understanding the simplicity of the method and trying it out, and it's working. So very lucky.
Dr. McKibben, you just mentioned earlier sleep, and it just caught my attention because I was recently having, maybe just this week, a conversation with my wife about um, knowing several people who have problems with sleep, or I guess they can't go to sleep. And the majority of the people we were referencing take medication to put themselves to sleep. Um, and now you mentioned sleep, so it just caught my attention. I was just having this conversation.
Well, thank you for listening so carefully. And yes, sleep is another topic. And not only in the book will they learn what's causing the deficit of sleep, but I teach them three methods on how to get to sleep using how the brain is designed to manage sleep. And you're going to be surprised at what I say, because if someone's having difficulty getting to sleep or staying asleep, either they go on medication or they go to a sleep study or a special.
Hmm.
And what do they come home with other than medication? What does the doctor send them home with so they can sleep better? A CPAP machine.
Yes.
What does that CPAP machine do? It floods the individual with oxygen flow. So imagine with me for a moment. I put my head on the pillow. I can't stop overthinking. That's building up feelings physically, and those neuromuscular contractions, and with every thought that's triggered, without a method to change it, start cutting off blood flow and oxygen flow to the brain. So the reason many people can't get to sleep isn't what they're thinking about, it's that they're triggering their system physically and decreasing because of the buildup oxygen flow to the brain. So I teach people, no surprise, to when their head hits the pillow, when they notice they're lighting up, they're already programmed to notice, instead of what they're thinking, where their body's reacting. They shift, notice where, they drop to the blank screen long enough for those physical reactions to go back to neutral, blank screen. And that's when the oxygen flow to the brain is maximum. And with that one method, I teach three. They may have to shift, I keep thinking, well, I use their method, I get to the blank screen, then I start thinking again. And they may have to do that several times, but within about 10 minutes, they will be asleep, because the issue is oxygen flow issue, not a psychoanalytic issue of figuring out what they're feeling. What also enhances sleep is the ability to identify and manage and resolve feelings during your waking hours. Because sleep difficulty isn't just because you put your head on the pillow, it's you're still thinking about that thing during the day that never resolved.
Hmm.
I'm giving people a way to identify and resolve feelings each time they happen all day long, physically and emotionally. So it isn't building. So by the time they put their head on the pillow, there's very little to drop to or think about because they've resolved it already.
That's the second one you said, right? You said there was three.
That's three. The second one is I teach a method for stopping thinking by shifting to look at the darkness before your closed eyes, the ocular system. And the third method is when they can't stop thinking, they're up and wake up in the middle of the night, or they can't get to sleep. They keep thinking about an issue or what's going to happen tomorrow. I teach them to shift from what they're thinking by notice how quickly or slowly the rhythm of their thoughts are. That shifts the autonomic nervous system into releasing it and increases oxygen flow to the brain naturally. So there's three methods they'll see in the book of how to get to sleep.
My problem is not falling. I can fall asleep like this almost. Maybe just too much. My wife complained.
No, it's waking up. And what you'll notice is it's either you're aware of, running from feelings cognitively, and there's a physiology that's building up with that. Every time you're triggered to feel, there's a physical reaction and an emotional one. We want to recognize it and get that physical reaction to neutral so the oxygen flow continues to the brain, but you have to do it every time. And eventually, with practice, that shift and drop replaces the running from feelings during your waking hours as well as when you're trying to get to sleep. So it's an oxygen flow issue more than figuring out why am I thinking about that issue.
Yeah.
That's why it's so self-reliant a method.
Yeah. It's a great method. Thank you for sharing that.
Sure.
Yeah. I know you've been in private practice, doctor, you said now for over 30 years. If I can briefly take you back to that moment when you started your private practice, how was it? What can you remember? I'm sure it was different working for someone than finally going off on your own and sort of hanging your own shingle per se. And now you had to tell everyone, hey, I'm now here. Everyone's welcome.
I got a lot of reinforcement when I was first worked in psychiatric hospitals because I was working specifically with the mind body. How do people identify and manage feelings and how do they present physically? But I got approached by a physiatrist who said, your drop method would really help people in anxiety and physical therapy. Or other psychiatrists would say, would you see my patients because they need a method to identify and resolve feelings physically and emotionally by detecting the onset of feelings in that mind, body, brain way. So I incorporated, um, they would see me work, they would hear me work. I did lectures, and then they would encourage me to branch out to other populations or other people to teach them how to do the method because they found it effective for their patients. That was in the hospital. Then I went into private practice because I got a lot of support for doctors or physicians or counselors wanting people to learn my method of drop to the blank screen. And then from private practice, I went full force into it, but I also worked at this day treatment hospital, which was a unique um, hospital for dealing with substance abuse outpatient. I don't know, Dr. George Kalogner started that, and he did it for 45 years and was very successful in helping people. And I was just a component of that treatment team in specifically teaching people why they're doing what they're doing and how to change it with the drop methodology.
That's great. If someone's listening to this, doctor, and obviously they're interested and want to learn more, and they know that there's a recent book you came out, Drop Making Great Decisions, that book, like who is it for? If someone's listening, who's the ideal person who should be reading that book?
Anybody who has difficulties with people or sleep or performance or they're attracting people to date that it's just not working, or they're getting walked all over by people at work. Any number of situations that are outlined in the book. I think there's uh, 9 topics that I cover in the book. One of the best ones is how do I be sure or ensure my children arrive in adulthood with high self-esteem. And I always say, well, you can't teach them to drop, but if you're dropping and having a methodology that's different than immediately acting your children and instead shift, drop, and respond to them, they will emulate you and change to a more effective style of managing feelings in people. If
Oh,
you
that,
listen to yourself and make decisions, so will they.
hmm. So lead by example there.
Absolutely. Because children don't listen to what we say, they listen to what we do.
So true. That's so true. Just earlier this morning, I have 3 boys. My middle one was trying to scare me playing around, and he said something. I forgot exactly what he said, but I was like, huh, I wonder where he got that from. That sounds very familiar.
Oh, yeah. Well, think of being a parent and you married or you have a child, all of a sudden they do something and we find our parents coming out of our mouth in reaction to them and go, whoa. And then we
Yes.
back to the child and say, hey, you didn't do anything wrong. Someone used to do that with me. I'm working on not doing it anymore. And how did I identify that? Because I lit up. Every time the brain lights us up physically, and as we're interacting in life or with ourselves, there can be a feeling there that needs to be resolved and used in a decision.
Yeah, that's so true. Coming to an end here soon, doctor. What would you say is your biggest challenge with your role today in your business?
Well, I'll tell you, quite honestly, I s- didn't write a book for years because I really enjoy working clinically with people and teaching anyone how to use this method to have a better life. And so I've gotten through my practice after years and finally said, well, I'm going to bite the bullet and I'm going to write a book and see how it goes. I just wanted to get this methodology out there for anyone to use in identifying, managing, and resolving feelings, no matter what their life issues are, because it can apply to grief and mourning losses. Any triggered feelings identified, and if you go through it, you're going to make more effective decisions and resolve the feeling at the same time. So I bit the bullet and I wrote a book and it's out there and we'll see what happens.
How was that process as far as writing the book?
Very long. You know, what did someone used to say? It takes a village to raise a child. It takes a village to write a book. You know, it's a lot of different pieces that I would have never thought about that have to be integrated. And I had wonderful producers or a publicist or editors that helped me through that process because they're the experts. They know what people can read. They know how to say the things that I'm trying to say that will be effective for their readers. So I was very
Oh,
fortunate to have that group of people working with me.
that's great. How long would you say it took from, I guess, from the very beginning till when it was finally published?
Uh, 3.5 years
Yeah, it's a long, long process.
on process.
That's great. What does the future look like for you and the business in the next couple of years? What are you most excited about?
Getting the word out now that I find people are interested. Um, I always have enjoyed the success that people um, are having from teaching them the method to be self-reliant in this way. And now, if we can widen the audience, that would be wonderful.
Yeah,
Instead of just working in my clinical practice, let's see if this is going to work for other people as well.
that's true. Let's help everyone out.
And you never know, but so far people are getting it. So it must be simple enough and straightforward enough to them for them to relate to the examples and how to change. So that's marvelous news. So just keep that ball rolling as I'm working in my private practice.
There you go. Dr. McKibben, thank you so much for coming on today and sharing your thoughts, your wisdom, and everything. If people want to learn more about you, go grab the book, learn about your practice. Where can they go to, please?
There's a website, www.helenmckibben.com, spelled MCKIBBEN. That is my website. I'm on all social media as well, but the website really delves into, I write blogs about like sleep and how to deal with it. It tells you how to contact me. It tells you the breakdown of the brain and how it works. It goes over the methodology. Um, and just motivates people that if they're having life issues that they don't know how to change, that, you know, we'd love for you to engage in this process. The website is wonderful and it just tries to motivate people to change. And then while you're at it, give this methodology a try if you want something quick and simple that can be effective if you work it yourself.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you again, Dr. McKibben.
Okay, thank you so much.
Of course, the pleasure's all mine. Take care.
Bye.